Well, greetings, everyone. Matt Bove here. I am riding solo for this episode of the podcast. Sal traveling back with the Bills overnight from Tampa following the Bills preseason game. So he wasn't going to get back until like 4 in the morning, and then it would have just been cruel to make him wake up a couple hours later to record a podcast. So I'm recording this, full disclosure, I'm recording this literally like 10 minutes after the game has come to an end. I watched the game on TV. I normally don't do that, so my perspective is a little bit different than it usually is. But I think we can all agree this was a much more buttoned up and clean performance for the Bills on both sides of the ball. I don't think the results really matters, and I have said that multiple times when we do these preseason podcasts. I don't think the result is nearly as important as the individual performances, but it shouldn't be a surprise that they got a better result in this game with all of the impressive individual performances we saw, and there's a lot of them to talk about over the course of the next little bit here. We'll talk a little bit about the 53-man roster, what I think ultimately it could look like. Sal and I will, of course, be touching base again early next week. Cutdown day for the Bills. They're going to go from 90 players to 53 players is Tuesday at 4 o'clock. Then there will be a Hard Knocks later that night, so I would imagine we go live after the Hard Knocks episode like we have been doing. So 23-19, the final for the Bills. They finished the preseason 1-2. Josh Allen does not take any snaps in the preseason. The first time in his career that has not happened. I think that's the smart move. I think the risk far outweighs the reward of Josh Allen going on the field and throwing 2 or 3 passes. In this game in particular, I think there's a couple big storylines. The big one to me is Tyrell Shavers. I think Tyrell Shavers made the Buffalo Bills 53-man roster tonight. Before this game started, I think I would have put him on the outside looking in. It was really, really close. Now, I don't know how you can keep this guy off your roster. Now, that being said, I think I was saying some eerily similar stuff last year in the preseason, and the Bills still kept him off the roster. But I think it was notable that we saw him playing some special team snaps in this game, because if he's going to be the 5th or 6th receiver on this team, he's going to need to play some special team snaps in some capacity. But that one-handed catch was absolutely absurd. He had a nice catch down the sideline where he just kind of stopped and waited for Shane Buechele to buy some time. He did have a drop. It was a little bit of a low ball. Definitely needs to bring that one in. But when you see the spectacular catch that he makes, it's like, okay, that's what everybody is going to remember, and that's what other teams are going to see. So sneaking him onto the practice squad, I don't think is going to be as easy as it was before this game. So Tyrell Shavers, I really think did a lot to make this 53-man roster, and I think he's got a very strong chance of doing that. All of that said, I would still think that guys like Elijah Moore and Curtis Samuel would be ahead of him. The way I see him making the 53-man roster is them keeping 6 wide receivers instead of 5 wide receivers. And if you're listening to this or watching this and you're like, how the heck would Tyrell Shavers not be ahead of Elijah Moore or Curtis Samuel? Well, Curtis Samuel was playing really important snaps for them in the playoffs last year. He had a really big day against the Broncos with a big touchdown. He caught a crucial 4th down touchdown in the 4th quarter against the Chiefs to momentarily tie the game. So I don't want to write him off yet. And then as for Elijah Moore, just from what we have seen out at practice, it feels like the team thinks that he will be a bigger piece to this offense when it is Josh Allen on the field. That's just my read on it. I think they do like the versatility that he provides. I think he's a little bit of an insurance policy for a guy like Khalil Shakir because he can play a little bit everywhere. So I think that they're going to keep 6 wide receivers, and I think Tyrell Shavers is going to be one of those wide receivers. So that is kind of the big riser for me coming out of this game. I think that he is going to be on the team. Then you have the other players who we wanted to see improvements from, and Cole Bishop checks that box. In the 2 series that Cole Bishop played, I liked what we saw, and I think the team liked what they saw because then after that, took him off the field, got him off. It was just nice to see the anticipation that he was playing with, how comfortable he looked. It would be a problem if he didn't look this way against backups for the Bucs. It was different last week. He was playing against starters for the Bears, didn't look as comfortable. In this game, he looked more comfortable. I think that is a good sign. I think that if nothing else, this is just going to make the Bills a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more confident with their decision moving forward. He hasn't even won the job yet, but in my head, he's kind of won the job just because I really don't know who else would be there. I don't think it's going to be Damar Hamlin, even though I think he's on the team. I think Jordan Hancock had an outside chance at winning a starting safety job, but then once he got banged up, that went away. I think he'll still be on the team. And then the only other guy in the room is Cam Lewis, who I think they really like as just versatile option to play at safety and nickel cornerback and absolutely in an emergency play the boundary. But I just really don't see anybody starting over Cole Bishop. But I did think we saw what we needed to from his game tonight, or, whenever you're listening to this, but his game on Saturday against the Bucs. And then I think we also need to talk about Deion Walker, because he had a really strong outing in this game. He had a sack. He had a couple tackles for loss. He had a quarterback rush that rushed a throw that the Bills were able to make a play on. So it's just a nice outing for him once again. Take it with a grain of salt because it is against backups, but it was nice to see some of the explosiveness coming from that player. Now, full disclosure, I'm working on a story for Channel 7 where we had a conversation, myself and Joe Biscaglia, had like a half an hour conversation with David Edwards and Connor McGovern, two of the Bills' starting offensive linemen, and I asked them, you guys are going against these young defensive linemen. Who has stood out to you? And Connor McGovern immediately said Deion Walker. He was like immediately and basically told me that he thinks he's going to be a really good player in the NFL. David Edwards said Deion Walker and TJ Sanders. So just having this rotation of defensive linemen, I think is going to prove to be valuable for the Bills when they need that, because how many times have we heard them or seen them go back into the well and find a player like Quentin Jefferson or Jordan Phillips or somebody who had been gone because their depth at defensive tackle starts to get tested a little bit. So I think it's a good sign that a player like Deion Walker is flashing and that TJ Sanders has had a pretty strong summer. So those are definitely good things for the Bills moving forward. But how does this impact the 53-man roster? Because both of those players were already on the team. Like, there's no way that neither of those guys was making the team. What I think it does is I think it gives the Bills a little bit more flexibility with the suspensions to Ogunjobi and to Hoyt, even though I think both of those guys will eventually be, like Hoyt for sure. Ogunjobi, I think, eventually will be back on this roster. Dwayne Carter's a really interesting name. With the Bills, I think it would be a shocking move for them to move on from that player already. I just don't see that happening. So I think right now the Bills will likely keep probably 10 defensive linemen, and Dwayne Carter will be one of those players. But then when those suspensions end, then the Bills are going to need to get creative if nobody else is injured. So I'm thinking it's going to be pretty status quo on the defense with the defensive line. All the names that you thought were going to make it were probably going to make it here. I'll read you off the projection that I have. I just wrote this on Channel 7, so bear with me for a second. So the defensive line projection that I have is Greg Rousseau, Joey Bosa, A.J. Epinesa, Javon Solomon, Landon Jackson, Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, T.J. Sanders, Deion Walker, and Dwayne Carter, with both Michael Hoyt and Larry Ogunjobi suspended. So that's what I'm anticipating that looks like. I think another promising performance we saw in the third and final preseason game was the play of Jimmy Charlo, the linebacker. I think fans really have liked his story, especially after seeing how he was featured on Hard Knocks and the West Point stuff. Here's the thing. I don't think he has done enough to make the roster, but it feels like that is a perfect practice squad candidate for the Bills, who will likely stick around, learn the system a little bit more, get a little bit more comfortable, maybe get elevated if there is a linebacker injury, or maybe find a way onto this roster in a year or two after spending some time on the practice squad. So even though Jimmy Charlo has had a strong couple weeks, I do not think he has done enough to make the 53-man roster. I will say the same thing about Frank Gore Jr., and some of you are going to be really, really mad at hearing this. Really like the camp and the preseason performance. Don't think there was even a chance he could have made the roster unless there was an injury to one of the Bills' top 3 running backs. They just gave James Cook a ton of money. Ray Davis is still on a super cost-controlled contract, and they like what they've seen from him. And Ty Johnson, in Josh Allen's words, is one of the best third down or the best third down back in the NFL. They're not keeping more than 3 running backs and 1 fullback. So I think Frank Gore Jr. will ultimately find his spot on the practice squad. And if there's an injury to one of the starters or one of the top 3 running backs, he will get elevated. If you don't think he'll get to the practice squad, there is a chance he won't. but teams tend to like their own running backs that have been in their own system. And I don't know if a team will take Frank Gore's strong performances in the preseason against mostly backups and then take him and put him on their 53-man roster. So it feels like it's a relatively safe bet that the Bills will be able to get him onto the practice squad, even though I definitely agree. I like the play. I think he has deserved and earned probably a bigger opportunity. It's just a tough situation for him because the Bills' running back room has become a strong suit for them. Then we get to the offensive line. I'm really interested to see what they do because it feels like if they're going to keep 6 wide receivers, maybe they only keep 9 offensive linemen, and I think they've got a decision to make with a player like Ryan Vandermark. I wouldn't be shocked if this was a player they potentially tried to move with just a little bit of NFL experience to maybe a team that needs a tackle, and because he's got some games under his belt, a team would give you a late pick if he was just a player who wasn't going to be on your team. Just because right now, if it was between Ryan Vandermark and Chase Lunt, 2 UConn Huskies, to be the player that they keep as kind of their primary backup or one of their backup tackles. Like I think Tylen Grable is their primary backup tackle. Even though he has been injured or in concussion protocol, it seems like he's nearing a return. I would anticipate Grable is on the roster, and then the other backup tackle is likely either Chase Lunt or Ryan Vandermark. And right now, I think I would give the slight edge to Chase Lunt. A little bit younger, I think had a little bit of a stronger summer. Ryan Vandermark struggled at times. So that's interesting. And then what do they do at center, right? Because here's what I have. I had them keeping on my projected 53-man roster Deion Dawkins, David Edwards, Connor McGovern, Osiris Torrance, Spencer Brown as the starters. None of those should be surprises. Alec Anderson is the primary interior backup. Tylen Grable we talked about. Chase Lunt, and then I have them keeping Kendrick Green as their kind of primary backup center. Now, if the reasoning behind this is, well, Alec Anderson would be your backup center, I would agree with that. But I think he would also be your backup guard at both left guard and right guard. So if you had an injury at one of those spots and then a center injury popped up, I think you would need a true backup center, and that's why I went with Kendrick Green in this situation. Has a couple years of NFL experience, played a little bit in this league, feels like they probably trust him a little bit more than maybe some of the younger options, and Cedric Van Pran-Granger, the guy who they drafted last year, just hasn't been available. So I think that's a player who will stay on PUP. Because he was on PUP already, he can stay on PUP. So that's what I would anticipate happening with a player like that specifically. And then they figure things out once they have a little bit more clear of a timeline on Cedric Van Pran-Granger. It's crazy that we have done this episode and we're 13 minutes in, 12 and a half minutes in. Really haven't talked about Shane Buechele much. Had a really awesome day. Like, kudos to Shane Buechele for having a strong performance and probably honestly doing enough to get a spot on the practice squad. He has been in the building for the last couple of years. I think what he did in this preseason finale has gotten him a spot on the practice squad, as well as Mike White. I think even though you might have a couple other players or positions you probably would need to prioritize, I could see the Bills keeping their quarterback room exactly as is. Josh Allen is the starter. Mitch Trubisky is the backup. Mike White is in the practice squad room, and Shane Buechele is in the practice squad room. They always talk about how close the quarterback room is. They always talk about how much chemistry there is. Because of what we saw from Shane Buechele, I think they would want to keep him around because of his relationships with some of the other guys. I do think Mitch Trubisky clearly won the backup quarterback competition. I think that started to change. I think the first preseason game was pretty even, and up to that point in the summer, it was pretty even. But then after that, it felt like Trubisky started to ascend a bit, and Mike White started to descend. And it felt like this whole time, Mike White had to straight up win the job. And it never felt like it got to that point. It just felt like he was kind of hanging around. Trubisky's got more experience. He's the more mobile option. He's got more experience. Listen, if the Bills have an injury to Josh Allen, they're going to be in some serious trouble. But you can say the same thing about the Ravens, about the Bengals, about the Chiefs, about any team that has an elite quarterback. The drop-off is massive, but obviously it's something to be talking about, especially in the preseason. So I do think it's Josh Allen, Mitch Trubisky. Those are the two guys on the roster. I think Mike White and Shane Buechele both go to the practice squad. The only other really interesting thing we need to talk about, at least in my opinion, right off the bat, is the competition for who's going to be the primary returner. The names that were in this mix were Brandon Codrington, the defensive back, Laviska Shenault, the wide receiver, That's kind of it. I mean, I know I had mentioned on the podcast a couple times, like maybe Elijah Moore could do it. And I think for kick returns, it's going to probably be either Ty Johnson or Ray Davis, one of the two of them. I think I would give the slight edge to Codrington just because of the position he plays. I think having another defensive back because of the injuries would bode well. And I also think he might be the more dynamic option, even though it still leaves a bad taste in my mouth that the team didn't trust to bring him back in the playoffs last year, even though he was practicing. It's like, okay, if you couldn't trust him in that moment, then why would you even have him here in the first place? It does feel like still young player, untapped potential. Eventually, I think he'll break a big one off, and then maybe that'll give an even bigger boost to his confidence. So I right now on the 53-man roster that I put together, I put Brandon Codrington on it. If I'm right, I don't know, but I guess we'll find out on Tuesday. Oh, and the other big thing we should talk about, and I probably should have done this earlier, is the cornerback room, because they've got a lot of injuries there now. Tre'Davious White has a little lower leg injury, was the word he used on the broadcast interview with Josh Reed before the game. So on Channel 4, Josh Reed, their sports director, interviewed the general manager of the Bills, Brandon Beane, and he said it was a little lower leg injury, but did not have a timeline on it. So the fact that he said little, like it's a little lower leg injury, that's a tongue twister, at least to me makes it seem like it's not something like incredibly serious, but it's also not great that he didn't give a timeline on it and that he said that they need to do a little bit more when they get back to Buffalo. So that's not great. And then the broadcast itself, not that this would be a huge surprise, mentioned that he did not make the trip. I think Andrew Catalan said that, or Steve Tasker said that Tre'Davious White did not make the trip. So now all of a sudden, you might need to figure out who is going to be your starting cornerback opposite Christian Benford in week 1, who also, by the way, got dinged up a little bit at practice. He told us after practice on Thursday that he's fine, but still, like, something to monitor that he got off the field and just kind of stood there on the sideline. So, okay, if Christian Benford is starting a cornerback, who starts opposite him if Trey White isn't available? Well, Max Hairston, the guy who is supposed to be in the competition with Tre'Davious White, he still isn't back yet. I can't see a world where he is up to speed and playing in 2 weeks coming off this injury. I think there's a better chance that he starts the season on IR than he starts the season on the 53-man roster. So if that's the case, then he's out for 4 weeks. What do? Is it Dorian Strong? Is it Jamarcus Ingram? Is it you call Russell Douglas and get him back? I think a lot of people might have assumed that it was Dane Jackson just because he's been around for a long time, but Dane Jackson played really late into this game. Like, it was either the end of the third quarter or the beginning of the fourth quarter, and Dane Jackson was still out on the field. And I don't think that's a good sign that he was on the field way longer than Dorian Strong was or Jamarcus Ingram was. So to me, when you're talking about the pecking order in the cornerback room, it's, okay, obviously Christian Benford, Trey White, Max Hairston, knowing that there's injuries and that's a bit more complicated, then probably Dorian Strong, then probably Jamarcus Ingram, and then probably Dane Jackson. So I think that this is going to be something the Bills need to address if the Trey White injury spills into the season. If it doesn't, and you have your starting 2 corners at the beginning of the season, then you just kind of need to hope that you can tread water while Max Hairston is continuing to rehab. Maybe Trey starts to look good. Maybe he can hold down that cornerback 2 thing, the cornerback 2 job. But the summer for Trey White has been a little bit up and down. Like, it started a little down, then it got up. And then it was like, whoa, there were days when Trey White was legitimately the best player on the practice field. And then it started to slip a little bit, and it was like, okay, like, there's going to be some bumps here. I don't know if he's going to hold off Max Hairston for the entire season, and now he's dinged up a bit. So that's, of course, something to monitor. If I'm the Bills and Trey White's hurt, I'm calling Russell Douglas just because he knows the defense. He knows Christian Benford. I don't think he's an amazing option for you at this point, but he's better than anything else you've got currently, especially if Trey White is unavailable. You'd have to figure out a way to make the money work, and I don't even know if that's a possibility, but I would imagine that's a call they at least make and explore if this Trey White thing lingers, or Christian Benford. Like, if any of these injuries are lingering into the season, the thing that's tricky is Sean McDermott may be talking right now to the media that, apparently nobody asked a question about Tre'Davious White during the Sean McDermott postgame press conference. So that is where that is. So we won't likely get an update on Trey White until Wednesday, it sounds like. So maybe we'll learn something beforehand. I'm sorry that I don't have a clear update on that, but I was just literally, Joe Buscaglia just texted me that there was no update on Trey White following the game and the press conference the other day. So that is it for this wrap. We went about 20 minutes. I very much appreciate you watching, taking the time. Also met an awesome guy named John, who is my Uber driver on Friday or Saturday night, who is a big fan of the podcast and told Sal to say hi. So, John, thank you for the ride the other night, and I am now publicly telling Sal hi from John. Sal is on his way back to Buffalo overnight. We will likely be back with you guys on Tuesday unless anything substantial happens between now and then. Cutdown day, once again, is Tuesday at 4 p.m. Whenever you are listening to this, however you are listening to this, we very much appreciate it. We hope you have an amazing rest of your evening, day, whatever it is, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks for listening to another episode of It's Always Game Day in Buffalo.